Today I'm bringing you the reading habits tag. The first question is, do you have a certain place at home for reading? So I'll kind of read anywhere. Sometimes I feel like reading on the couch. A lot of the times I just read in bed because a lot of the reading I do is either right when I wake up or right before I go to bed. But I also have this little reading nook in my room. It's right below the window and I have this little bench and sometimes I sit there. But to be honest, it's not the most comfortable bench in the world. So I've only actually read there for a long period of time, once when I was reading Rain the Earth. The second question is, do you use a bookmark or a random piece of paper? Bookmark. I have lots of really pretty bookmarks. This one is probably my favorite one. It says, where there is love, there is life, and it's red with hearts on it. There's a little ribbon thingy. The third question is, can you just stop reading, or do you have to get to the end of a chapter or a certain number of pages? So I can do either. It kind of depends on what I'm reading and how into it I am. I sometimes have to wait until the end of a chapter because I'm really into a book and I don't want to put it down. So like I sort of bargain with myself, okay, one more chapter and I'll put it down, or sometimes I just finish it. So some other books I just don't care, so I'll just put down, particularly if I'm bored. There's one book in particular right now that I'm kind of forcing myself to get to the end of the chapter to put it down to sort of get through it because it's taking me so long to read it. The fourth question is, do you eat or drink while reading? Yes, always. I find that if I don't have a cup of tea when I'm reading, it feels like something is missing. So I almost always have tea, and I usually have cookies, and sometimes I eat during my lunch, so I eat an entire meal while I'm reading. Yes, books and food go together well. Number 5 is multitasking. Do you watch TV or listen to music while you're reading? Yes, again, both. Not at the same time, obviously. Although I guess you could do that, but it doesn't really make sense. But what I do depends on the book itself or what I'm watching. So Friends is one of those shows that I just like to have on in the background basically all the time. So I can read pretty much anything with Friends on in the background. But if the book takes a lot more concentration or is a little bit more boring and I need to get through it, I'll put on classical music. Right now I like to tell my Amazon Echo to play the playlist classical for reading or classical for focus if I really am having trouble focusing on a book. I also like to listen to movie scores. Lord of the Rings and Harry Potter are two of my favorites, but I also listen to those when I'm writing, so I try not to do that too much because I don't want to mix up the mental relationship between writing and those musics. Number 6 is, do you read one book at a time or several? Usually several. Partially because I listen to audiobooks a lot, so I'll often listen to an audiobook, and then I also have another book I'm reading. If I'm not totally into that book, I'll have another book after that, so I can switch between the boring one and the good one so that I don't ever have nothing to read, because sometimes if you're reading a book that you're not totally into, you need to have options. And sometimes I kind of follow the Rory Gilmore mentality, which if you watch Gilmore Girls, Rory talks about how she always have a novel, short stories, poetry, and everything all going at the same time. I kind of do that too. Right now I'm in the middle of a book of essays, a novel, another novel which is an audiobook, and a nonfiction book. I have quite a few going at the same time. Number 7 is, do you read at home or everywhere? Everywhere. I'll read everywhere. I always have a book on me. Like I said before, I read on my lunch, at work. I'll read if I'm on a drive somewhere and I get bored. Not if I'm driving. That's audiobook time. Planes, trains, automobiles, at Barnes & Noble, at the library. Although at the library I usually get distracted by all the other books. But basically, yeah, I'll read anywhere and everywhere. Number 8 is, do you read out loud or silently in your head? Silently in my head, unless I'm reading to someone, and sometimes I'll be reading and someone else is in the room and I'll come across a really beautiful sentence or something and I'll read it aloud and be like, listen to the sentence, it's so beautiful. Number 9 is, do you read ahead or even skip pages? Yeah, I like to spoil myself, so it's both extremes. If I'm enjoying a book and I want to really enjoy the experience, then I won't. But if I'm really bored, I will skip a few pages to see if it's getting better in a few pages, or like skim to get past the boring part. I did that a lot in Lord of the Rings. I find parts of Lord of the Rings very boring. I will skim to get to a good part, or I'll skip even to the back of the book and find out if the ending is worth actually getting to if I'm bored enough. And if a book is really good and I really love it, sometimes I'll kind of skip a few pages ahead to get an idea of what's going to happen because I'm really impatient. I guess another time that I skip ahead is if there's a scene where characters are in great danger and I'm like, are they okay? So I'll skip a few pages ahead to see if their name pops up, which kind of defeats the whole purpose of the tension. So, but yeah, I like to spoil myself quite a bit. I do it all the time. And then sometimes people will accidentally tell me something about a book and they'll be like, oh wait, that's a spoiler, and I'm like, it's fine. Number 10 is, do you break the spine or keep it like new? I keep it like new, and I'm kind of really obnoxious about it. So some books I will only open like this much to avoid breaking the spine. And one time someone came up and saw I was reading a book, and it was The Graveyard Book by Neil Gaiman, and she picked it up and she was really excited and said, oh, I wanted to read this book for a while, and she picks it up and opens it and breaks the spine. I was so upset, and I reacted so strongly that some people were like, that was a little bit of an overreaction, and then one of my best friends turned to me and she was like, no, it was not. I think this is definitely one of those things. If you are a person who keeps the spine clean, that kind of reaction is not extreme if it happens to you. The last question is, do you write in your books? My answer is yes and no. For school books, I always wrote in them because when it came up in discussions and stuff, I wanted to be able to just quickly reference it. And I was an English major, so it took too much time to read and write notes on a separate piece of paper. So it was just easier to put it in. And then I sort of saw it as like a memento almost of college. So now I look back on my college books and I'm like, oh yeah, that's what I thought of that thing. So it makes rereads really interesting. I wrote quite a bit in my books. Now though, I don't really have a reason to write in my books because I'm not in a rush to finish it by a certain time. Usually I tab my books. So if I'm in a really big rush, I won't tab. And if I have a particular reason for taking really detailed notes, I take them in a notebook. Like for my book club discussions, I take notes in a notebook because I sort of organize the discussion. So I want to make sure that I have extensive notes for any of the discussion, and also notes that can lead me to create sort of like discussion questions later on. So that was the reading habits tag, and as always, there are so many books and so little time, so I'm gonna go read and I will see you in my next video. Bye!